The role of the performing arts and painting is a fascinating and nuanced topic in Islam. The role of performing arts and painting in Islam is not a simple, allowed, or forbidden, but exists on a spectrum of acceptance, influenced by interpretation, historical period, and cultural context. The overarching principle guiding all Islamic art is Tawhid, the oneness of God. Art should, directly or indirectly, reflect the divine unity, harmony, and order of God's creation. It often seeks to spiritualize the material world rather than simply replicate it. Let's break down the two categories. 1. Painting and visual arts, taswir. The most debated aspect of visual art is the depiction of sentient beings, particularly humans and animals. This is often referred to as taswir, image making. The concerns and restrictions. Primary fear, idolatry. The strongest prohibition comes from the fear of creating idols for worship, which Islam vehemently opposes. This is rooted in the Quran's condemnation of idolatry and several hadith, sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, that warn against image makers, stating they will be asked to breathe life into their creations on Judgment Day, a task they will fail, thus highlighting the sin of usurping God's creative power. Imitating God's creation, khalq. Creating a likeness of a living being is seen by some scholars as a form of competition with God, the sole creator. Aniconism. Because of this, a strong tradition of aniconism, avoidance of images, developed in religious contexts. You will almost never find depictions of God, the Prophet Muhammad, or other prophets in mosques or religious manuscripts. This is to prevent any possibility of idolatry and to maintain absolute transcendence for the divine. The flourishing of figurative art. Despite these theological concerns, figurative painting flourished in the Islamic world, particularly in secular and courtly contexts. Manuscript illumination. Persian, Mughal, and Ottoman courts produced some of the most exquisite miniature paintings in history. These illustrated books, like the Shahnameh or epic poems, depicted battles, royal life, lovers, and mythical creatures. Function. In this context, the art was narrative and decorative. It was meant for the private enjoyment of the elite, not for public veneration. It was seen as celebrating the beauty of God's creation through storytelling. Stylization. Even when depicting figures, Islamic art tended to be highly stylized, two-dimensional, and abstract, avoiding the hyper-realism of European Renaissance art. This stylistic choice subtly acknowledged that the image was a human creation, not an attempt to perfectly mimic God's creation. The uncontested arts, calligraphy and geometry. Where figurative art was restricted, non-representational arts exploded with creativity and became the highest form of Islamic artistic expression. Calligraphy, the highest form of Islamic art. Because the Quran is the literal word of God, transcribing it became a sacred act. Calligraphy transforms divine revelation into visual beauty. It adorns mosques, manuscripts, and everyday objects. Arabesque and amp, geometry, infinite, repeating geometric patterns and floral arabesques symbolize the infinite, unending nature of God, Allah al-Samad, the Eternal. These patterns, which avoid a central focus, reflect the concept of Tawhid, everything emanates from and returns to the One. Summary for painting. There is a spectrum. Religious spaces are strictly aniconic, using calligraphy and geometry. Secular spaces, however, have a rich history of figurative painting, governed by context, intention, and style. 2. Performing arts, music, dance, theater. The performing arts even more complex and diverse in their acceptance across the Muslim world. Music, al-musica. There is no consensus on music in Islam. Views range from complete prohibition to full acceptance as a spiritual practice. The restrictive view. Some conservative interpretations cite hadith that associate musical instruments, especially wind and string, with diverting the heart from God and encouraging sinful behavior. They often permit only unaccompanied vocal music, like the nasheed, devotional songs, particularly those with pious lyrics about God, the Prophet, or Islam. The permissive, spiritual view, Sufism, Islamic mysticism, music is a central spiritual tool. The practice of sarma, spiritual listening, uses music and poetry to induce a state of spiritual ecstasy, wajd, and bring the listener closer to God. The whirling dervishes of the Mevlevi order are a famous example where music and movement are a form of worship, dhikr remembrance of God. Cultural ubiquity. Across the Muslim world, from Indonesia to Morocco, music is an integral part of daily life, weddings, festivals, and national celebrations. Classical traditions like Arabic makam, Persian daska, and qawwali from South Asia are deeply cherished cultural and spiritual treasures. Dance and theatre. Similar to music, the acceptability of dance and theatre depends heavily on context and intention. Theatrical storytelling, tazia, in Iran, a unique form of passion play called tazia developed, reenacting the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. This is a deeply religious and communal form of theatre that is considered an act of mourning and devotion. Dance. As with music, dance in a secular, celebratory context, like weddings, is widely practiced. In a religious context, it is primarily found in Sufi orders, like the aforementioned whirling dervishes, where the dance is a disciplined, spiritual practice, not entertainment. General concerns. The main objections to dance and theatre in more conservative circles revolve around themes of gender mixing, modesty, hijab, and the potential for promoting immoral behavior. Conclusion. A unified principle. The role of performing arts and painting in Islam is best understood through the lens of intention and context. The core question: does the art lead one towards God and spiritual reflection, or does it lead one away from God towards sin and forgetfulness? Gaffer. This is why you find calligraphy and geometry universally praised as they direct the mind to the divine word and cosmic order. Figurative painting accepted in secular narratives but excluded from mosques to prevent confusion with idolatry. Music and dance embraced in Sufism as a path to God, but sometimes questioned in purely entertainment-based settings that may violate Islamic ethical norms. In essence, Islamic civilization has not rejected art but has channeled it into specific forms. It has produced a unique aesthetic universe where the word, calligraphy, and the abstract pattern, geometry, arabesque, reign supreme, while the depiction of living forms and performance arts find their place within a carefully considered spiritual and social framework.